Leah, to you, and let's just give it one more minute to go. Thanks. Okay, thank you everybody for joining us on the Leaders in Housing Counseling call. This is our pre-Thanksgiving show, and we'll run through the agenda quickly and then dive right in. So I wanted to give you the latest update on the housing counseling funding and what's happening in Congress, and what's happening and not happening. And then we had a pretty interesting White House meeting on Thursday around developing a coordinated federal strategy around housing counseling. We're going to have Braden Listman from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods to join us, talk a little bit about how that went. And then we're going to give you a quick update on the December 11th meeting, which is coming together. And you always worry about the details, and this one looks like it's actually going to be good. So I'm hoping you'll have a good turnout there. Oops, lost the agenda here for a moment. But the next thing we'll be talking about is the CFPB has announced changes on the mortgage servicing rules. As you know, we've done a lot of work to try to strengthen these. Did a survey which has been acknowledged by CFPB as part of how they're evaluating all these things. And I think there's some good news in there too that Matthew's going to give us on this and some progress. We've got a series of webinars we're putting together around compliance issues, especially that for NHRC members. Want to make sure people knew about this as another membership benefit and opportunity. But these are based on what people are asking us for, and we're starting them this month, and starting in December, and we'll run through into 2015. And then just recently posted CFPB took action on a lender who was discriminating against people with disabilities. This is an area that I think lots of counselors see problems in. I'll describe what the particular issue is here, but I think it's an area that we want to know more about. And lastly, just if you're interested, please consider joining the National Housing Resource Center and build us into your budget for 2015, so that and also build in travel to the next Leaders Conference, because I'm sure we'll have one next year as well. Things are going well in the organization, and I just really appreciate all the support people have given us. So let's dive right in. So starting with the housing counseling funding. So what's the story on the current year funding, which theoretically would have started October 1? Matthew, what do we got?
Right. So just to keep things separate, we're talking now about the current year. As folks know, we currently are operating under a continuing resolution that was agreed on, but it's set to expire on December 11th. So the question was, this is kind of the big thing to be done by the lame duck Congress, and the question has been and still is whether they would pass an omnibus budget to fund the government through the rest of the year, the rest of the fiscal year, so through September 30th of next year, or whether they would do another continuing resolution that would just fund the government again for a short term, maybe a few months until the new Congress takes over, the new Republican-led Congress. We actually had been hearing that it was more likely that there would be an omnibus budget, which frankly I was a little surprised at. As folks most likely know, though, last week the president took an executive action on immigration reform, certainly against the wishes of Republicans in the House and Senate, and there's some concern that the repercussions of that could mean not doing an omnibus budget, in which case there would be a continuing resolution. I will say that there's very little concern at this point about nothing happening above them failing to reach at least an agreement on a continuing resolution. which would, if they did fail to do that by the 11th, there would be a shutdown. But nobody wants that, so it seems likely that that one or the other is going to happen. I guess just to summarize, it had seemed likely that there would be an omnibus. Now it's kind of a more of a question mark of whether it'll be a CR or an omnibus budget.
And then, so if it's an omnibus, we'd be at $50 million for NFMC, and then somewhere between 47 and 49 million with HUD Housing Counseling. And
Yes,
with the CR, we're basically at 45 million with Housing Counseling, and what, 67.5 million for NFMC?
Yes, exactly. So it is. I mean, it's as we've said before, a CR is not the worst thing for housing counseling funding because there's a bigger cut in NFMC funding is really why the CR is not the worst thing for us. I mean, the trade-off obviously is that there's more stability with an omnibus budget. I think agencies have trouble. Sorry, we've got the siren in the background. You know, it's difficult when funding is being done in 2 or 3 month intervals, but in terms of the actual numbers, it wouldn't be the worst thing that could happen for housing counseling funding.
Okay, so for 2016, the year coming up, this is the budget that they should be working on now. Well, actually, not they. The administration starts on. So, anyways.
Right. So it's coming up right again on us in the fall, kind of winter is when in the fall is when we get started, and the first step for us for the fiscal year is to write a letter to OMB, as the Office of Management and Budget, is the White House, basically the office that's responsible for putting out the president's budget. So the first step for us is to put into a request to them, which we'll do as a sign-on letter asking them for specific amounts for the programs that we're interested in. So this year we're going to be asking for $65 million for the HUD Housing Counseling Assistance Program and $50 million for the NFMC program. NFMC is a little bit easier. We're basically asking for them to level fund NFMC from FY 2015 to FY 2016. Appropriators have been very, very clear to us whenever we speak to them that this was meant to be a short-term program, and it's going to be wound down. So it's we are not going to ask. In the past we've asked for increases for NFMC. It's just crystal clear at this point that there's not going to be an increase in NFMC funding. So we think that the best strategy is to ask them to level fund it and just make the argument to the appropriators that the foreclosure crisis is not over and that they need to continue to fund foreclosure mitigation counseling. For HUD Housing Counseling Assistance, our ask is going to be for $65 million. So that is, as Bruce just said, that would be an increase from the current levels, which were the House passed it at $47 million and the Senate passed it at $49 million. And so we would make the argument to them that they should increase, and it would be a moderate increase in funding from current levels. And there's a lot of good arguments to be made for why they should do that. One thing is to stress the need for to expand capacity for pre-purchase counseling. The administration is really focused on the recovery and expanding access to credit is certainly their main housing priority at this point. So we think there's a good argument to be made for expanding capacity for pre-purchase counseling as we're kind of transitioning from the crisis and into the recovery. There's also folks in Congress have been very impressed with the turnaround at HUD, and specifically as a result of the creation of the Office of Housing Counseling. So there's, there in the past there had been some pushback against funding housing counseling. Obviously, when it was zeroed out was the peak of that. But we hear positive things now when we're on the Hill and talking about housing counseling, and so there's an argument to be made to increase funding because that office is working more effectively and more efficiently, which appropriators like to see. There's also going to be additional costs, as folks are well aware, as a result of the certification requirements. We think that's a good argument to make for why funding should be increased. So all this is to say is, we're going to make the argument for $65 million for HUD housing counseling assistance. That'll be our starting point with OMB, and we'll see what they ask, and we'll keep folks updated as we go through the process. Bruce, is there anything you want to add on funding?
Well, I mean, just we've been discussing this also with a coalition of HUD intermediaries. We're trying to all be on the same message on these kinds of things, and actually, this all came out of a conversation with the Housing Preservation Foundation. And maybe some of you, if you've done any lobbying with us on the Hill, often Andy Buchek is with us, who's from DICMO. It's a lobbying company that's hired by HPF to monitor things that go on the Hill, and they're pretty sophisticated in their analysis. And he did point out that we probably have the most sympathetic OMB head that we'll ever have, who understands housing counseling and supports it. And of course, that's Sean Donovan, who moved over from HUD to OMB. So if there's any time when we ought to be asking, this is the time to do it. And part of the issue is to ask HUD as well to make the request. But so the next steps are to put together a good sign-on letter, which we will distribute widely. And the goal is to get this out in early December, because now's the time when OMB is working on the budget and each of the departments are making their recommendations. So we would do the letter to the President and to OMB, but also circulate it to HUD and others in the administration.
And just one other thing to mention, we kind of talked a little bit during our last call about how when we talked about the impact of the elections on housing counseling generally, but specifically on appropriations. So just to kind of recap and a little bit of an update, I guess. So in the Senate, the THUD, the Transportation, Housing, and Urban Development Appropriation Subcommittee, it's not a fact, but it looks likely that Susan Collins from Maine, the Republican from Maine, will be the chair of the subcommittee. And it also looks likely, although it's a little less clear, that Patty Murray from Washington will be the chair of the ranking member for the Democrats. And those two women have worked very well together, and both have been generally supportive of housing counseling, which has been great. I just got a message from Laura Buxbaum that they're going to be meeting with Susan Collins' staff next week, and they have a great relationship. So we're definitely excited about the prospect of working well with Susan Collins and Patty Murray. And on the House side, it could be, but it's a lot more up in the air who are going to be the ranking member and chair of the THUD subcommittee. There is a chance that it's Charlie Dent who would take over for Tom Latham, is the outgoing chair of the subcommittee, but is retiring. So it could be Charlie Dent, not necessarily though, but Charlie Dent has obviously been a great advocate for us. So as far as the subcommittee assignments go, there may be some good news for us, even though generally you would describe a Republican-led Congress as less beneficial for us, but there's some room for optimism there.
Okay, so look for a letter, sign-on letter to OMB and the President on housing counseling funding. It's always one step in the process. Really appreciate everybody diving in on these, and we'll get that out shortly in the next few days. Okay, so we had a meeting with the White House, and it was really an attempt to pull together and develop a much more coordinated federal strategy around housing counseling. That there's these many agencies out there that are working working with us and doing things, but not in a coordinated way. And so the idea is to amplify what they do, to coordinate it, and to hopefully make it both more effective and larger. So that was kind of what we were the most broad sweep of all this. And we had in the room, I'm going to list this off, and then we're going to talk with Braden Listman who's one of the participants. But let me just read off who all was there. So it was, the White House was represented by Seth Wheeler from the National Economic Council. They had people from HUD, obviously, Treasury, CFPB, FHFA, the Federal Reserve, FDIC, OCC, and OMB. So, good turnout. Really does represent the spectrum of our work. It's nice because we got a lot of people there, but the White House also made an effort to get people there, and we got fairly senior people. So we had quite a team of housing counseling representatives who came in very much at the last minute to pull this together. Braden Listman was one of our people from the Center for New York City Neighborhoods. So Braden, are you on the line?
Yeah, I am.
Oh, excellent. There you go. Good. Okay, well, glad to have you. So tell me, this is, what was your sense of this meeting? Why don't you give us a quick overview of it?
Sure. I think, overall, I would say that all the agencies there were, willing to work together, willing to work with us. I think there was a push to make it sort of informal at this point, and I think Seth Wheeler said something, he used the term horizontal instead of top-down. And there was a lot of talk about, that they didn't want it to seem like the President's office was directing all these agencies to work together, but that they were willing to, meet with us again and continue talking with us to talk about what they're doing and to hear what we're doing. I think a couple of the highlights, things that stood out to me was, I believe it was the OCC had brought up working with realtors and trying to get together with realtors to push housing counseling forward, because it could be good for realtors if people get counseled before and are able to get the loans, then they could sell more houses. There's still a little bit of a conflict of interest in there, possibly, but that was talked about a lot. And then the other thing was the CFPB, as well as other agencies, really talked about the need for data to show what housing counseling is doing. And I think they mentioned that their post-modification counseling that they're doing now, they have 6 months of data, and they're starting to look through that. But they mentioned, the trainings that they've done, and some other things they've done in the past, where they've been able to collect data, and they're really interested in, of course, like we all are, I believe, in collecting as much data as possible to show how effective housing counseling is. And then I think the last thing for me is something that Matthew brought up earlier, was that the administration right now is really focusing on access to credit and getting people kind of more in recovery mode now, and really pushing forward seems like an agenda to really get, highlight the access to credit issue. And I think for me, those were the highlights.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's we're not going to forget foreclosure issues, and we'll keep them high on our list. But it's clear that in a lot of ways the administration wants to turn more towards the access to credit, and it's an important issue for us, especially because people are having such difficulties being able to buy houses. And it does create challenges and opportunities for us. But it is interesting how you can see them perk up on these set of issues. A lot of work we can do with FHFA. So one of the interesting things is, as you all know, I think Mel Watt announced in the 97% LTV loan product that they're looking at that housing counseling would be considered a compensating factor. Obviously, that's good news for us. There's an interesting underlying issue here, which is that Fannie and Freddie don't require you to be a HUD-approved housing counseling agency or even to be a nonprofit. So that under the current Freddie regime, you could actually just look at a workbook, and it's education, it's not counseling that's required. And with Fannie, you can they actually have in their portfolio groups that work with them a for-profit that provides this, and that the mortgage insurers want to do some of the counseling. And I think our sense of all this is that that there really needs to be one standard that's used by all the agencies, and HUD has invested heavily in HUD-approved housing counseling agency, and we're doing more with the this new certification process. And the idea that another agency would be kind of undermining that is something we really want to combat. That's part of this whole idea about coordinating is, can we have a consistent standard that runs through all the agencies? So I mean, this is one issue that we've been really trying to get on top of in the last week or so, as we learned how, as we began to understand how there wasn't standardization around a lot of these things. So this will be one which came up at the meeting, and I think this go-around FHFA was more aware of this issue because we brought it up. They weren't when we first raised it, and were surprised. So that's an opportunity. There'll be others like this that we're going to try to get a more consistent metrics and common reporting. Can the standard be the 9902 data, so that people don't have to come up with extra data fields, things that would really make things more coordinated and systemic, especially if once we have in place that the data fields for housing counseling and the mortgage application, and those will be then travel with a mortgage, then there'll be ways that this might impact Treasury's work, it might impact the CFPB's work, and we need to just think creatively and get them thinking creatively about how to do that. Let's see. So, and actually another thing which I was glad Ginger Charles from HUD, so she's the person that that Sarah Jarique reports to. So she was there representing HUD along with Ruth Roman and Brian Siebenlist. Sarah was out of state and out of town and couldn't be there for the meeting, but so Ginger came in her place, and Ginger sort of made a good, strong statement around the need for building and funding for housing counseling, and that it's important to really build up capacity and volume, but you also have to keep the lights on and pay the staff. That was a really nice, strong, supportive statement. So, Braden, what's your thoughts in terms of outcomes? What they committed to do out of this?
I mean, for me, it seems like that they're they're committed to doing something, and I think that we could, try to get them something to do, something concrete, and that they would be receptive to that.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it went very well. They weren't unwilling to work with us, obviously. So I think that the fact that they wanted to continue to meet and have those types of meetings is a good sign, and we can probably move forward with them and try to come up with some concrete steps for them to take.
Yeah, and I think we're going to need to drill down a lot on the specifics and work. We'll work some with other groups and with HUD on trying to figure out what's possible out of these forums. We made sure that they were committed to coming December 11th to the leaders meeting. So they'll be this group will be one of the panels, and Seth is planning on coming as well. So we'll have White House representation. And then the commitment was to start these meetings in January. So we'll work on getting some dates, and I think that the goal will be to try to identify a couple sets of things that that are standards that can strengthen the housing counseling programs inside the federal government and get a more consistent outreach program, get more consistent reporting, get more consistent standards like that it should be HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. And the second thing, which we put out there, and obviously we'll need some more work, but we will continue working on it, is the idea of, can the federal government really have an outgoing mission to encourage people to go to housing counseling before they make major financial housing decisions. And what we're thinking about here is, are there things that could happen in the field so that in your community there might be a set of events where housing counseling is featured, where it's aimed at the public, at the real estate community, not at the people we always talk to, the lenders, but more at a broader population. Are there public service announcements that can be done that might more mainstream our work and our value? Are there, I don't know what they are, documentaries, TV programs, whatever it is, things that might fit into these categories that would get people to think about housing counseling much more as an opportunity and take advantage of it early in the game. So, and while we talk to between 1.5 and 2 million people a year, the federal government, talks to tens of millions of people, and we may be able to try to leverage some of that. So, yeah, that was good. I thought our team of housing counseling representatives was great in terms of jumping in at the right moment, flipping the conversation and keeping it focused. So I thought it was a win all around. Braden, do you have any other closing thoughts here?
No, I mean, just to say what you've been saying. I think it went very well, and everyone that that was able to make it there the last minute, I think did a great job.
Yeah, no, it was good. Nice to see all the agencies there. Nice to see the meaning the federal agencies, and nice to see counseling groups. We had the Urban League. We had Center for New York City Neighborhoods. I'm going to get this wrong. New Jersey Community Capital. We had National Capacity. We had NHRC. I'm missing one or two, so excuse me for not remembering the list off the top of my head. But we had NeighborWorks there, and it was a good group of people. So there'll be more follow-up on this, and we're always interested in ideas to how to make this bigger and larger. But I think this is a step in the process, and it's a helpful one. I think having the kind of the White House coordinating piece, because they do they are kind of interested in thinking about things that might thread together programs to make something larger that will have some of the legacy for the administration as well. Good for the economy, good for the legacy. That's the goal. Okay, well, good. Thanks a lot, Braden. And we'll keep everybody informed of how this moves forward. Okay, so we mentioned December 11th, the Leaders in Housing Counseling meeting, and that's, I think it's going to be I'm actually getting pretty excited about this one. I think we'll have a good group of people. We're going to, in the morning, it'll be for NHRC members and lunch. We're thinking about a deep dive into what are the challenges facing housing counseling, what are the opportunities, what do we need to do in 2015 to try to move these all forward. Got some of our thought leaders within the industry kind of doing some good thinking about all this so that we could have a good, healthy discussion and figure out how we as a community and how NHRC as an organization can kind of move things forward in a way that strengthens everybody's work and helps with all the funding issues, helps with all the technology and cybersecurity issues, and really all the kind of policy programmatic challenges that we've got in front of us. So that I think that's sort of my favorite part of all these meetings. We do have an invitation to Secretary Castro to join us for lunch and for the first hour of the afternoon, and they're still working on his schedule, so we'll see how that turns out. And then in the afternoon from 1 to 6 will be the general meeting, so open to everybody, and we'll have all the agencies that were in the room for this White House meeting will join us for kind of a bigger, broader conversation, which would be helpful if you all would jump in on as well, because this is the kind of conversation that can kind of feed and make our work more effective. And then we'll sort of, at the end of the day, we'll also have a panel of people outside of our world who have some thoughts about how we might strengthen and amplify our work as well. So that should be an interesting conversation as well. And then we're going to, at 6 o'clock, we're going to break and go and have drinks and dinner at the Capital Brewing Company, which is close by to the hotel, and we'll just walk over, and we'll beer and wine and lots of room for conversation and dinner as well. So, and as always with our events, there's no charge, so we're glad to have people come and participate. It really would be helpful if you haven't already to schedule yourself. I'll put out these weekly notices both separately to the members and then to the leaders list. For the members have a separate registration link, and the general one will go out to the leaders list. So please sign up. We really do want you into these meetings. These are going to be kind of things that help us figure out which way we should be going on issues and what we should be doing. Okay, so let's talk about the changes to the servicing rules. So it's an area that we've done a lot of work in, and lots of people have done a lot of work in. So Matthew, so what's happened now? What is CFPB going to do?
All right. So I'm just going to preface this by saying that their proposal came out on Thursday and is 500 pages, and so I've started working through it, but I haven't read every word by a long shot. So this is going to be just a very kind of high-level summary of some of the things that are there in the rule. But as folks know, so they went into effect, I want to say January 10th or 17th of this year. The servicing rules took effect, and then kind of throughout this year, CFPB has made a few amendments to them, but this and now Thursday proposed some additional amendments to them, and this is a formal rulemaking, so it's a notice period, and it's open for public comment. I actually don't have the date. I want to say that it's 90 days from when it was published, maybe 60 days. I actually can find that pretty quickly. It's 90 days from when it was published, so 90 days from Thursday. So there's plenty of time, and we'll get into more depth on later calls on what exactly is in there, and encourage folks to make comments. But for now, I'll just kind of touch on some of the proposed changes that are in there. First would be a change to the prohibition on borrowers receiving the loss mitigation protections only once in the life of the loan. So that's how it's currently structured, is that basically the borrower is only entitled to the protections that are outlined in the rules once in the course of the loan. If you get a loss mitigation, for example, or if you get a loan modification rather, you would never, and then there's subsequent hardship, you would never be, the protections wouldn't be available to you and after that initial round. The proposal that they've made is now that the borrower would be eligible, or the protections rather would be renewed, the eligibility would be renewed every time the borrower became current after having been delinquent. So you become delinquent, the protections kick in. Now, if there's a subsequent hardship, you're no longer entitled to the protections from the rules. If the proposal that they've made took effect, you would be that you get a loss mitigation loan modification offer, accept it, become current again. Then, if you have a subsequent hardship, you would be eligible for the protections from the rule again. Was that a clear explanation, Bruce?
Good, and it sounds like we have a win there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Good.
Absolutely. So next thing I wanted to mention, it would require servicers to notify borrowers upon receipt of a complete loss mitigation application. So this is important. It seems like this was just kind of an oversight on their behalf when they did the initial rulemaking, but it was a pretty big one because, as folks know, a lot of the protections in the rule turn on the date at which the servicer received a complete application. And that starts the clock ticking on all kinds of important protections. But the requirements in the current rule are that the servicer needs to notify the borrower within 5 days of receiving the initial application, but there was no requirement that they notify the borrower when they had the complete application. So there's a lot of questions, and it was never perfectly clear what the date of that was, and therefore when all of these protections kicked in. So it's not a huge thing, but it's important, and it's important that they propose it, and certainly we'll encourage them to adopt that in the final rule. And again, Bruce, just jump in if any of this isn't clear, or if there's any questions you have offhand.
Good. That's good.
All right. This is not a huge thing, but it attempts to address the scenario where a servicer doesn't have the information it needs from a third party. So this is a complete application has to do with when the borrower has submitted the documents and information that are needed from the borrower. But it does the rule kind of left in the gray area what happens if the servicer needs information from someone other than the borrower, so a third party. The rule right now requires that within the servicer needs to make a decision on a complete application within 30 days of receiving everything they need from the borrower, but there's this kind of gray area, or the rule didn't address the fact that the servicer may not be able to do that because they may need information from a third party, and so it basically the proposed amendment would say that they can't deny, the servicer can't deny the application, and they can't initiate foreclosure procedures while they're waiting for information from the third party. So basically, it's just trying to fix that gap and say that they can't do anything adverse until they have that information from the third party. All right. It would allow, so the rule right now is that by and large, servicers are not permitted to make a decision based on an incomplete application, and that's really intended to prevent servicers from denying loss mitigation options on the basis of an incomplete application. This would create a small exception where servicers could offer a short-term repayment plan that would allow the borrower to repay the past due amounts over a specified period of time based on an incomplete application. So that's, I think it's pretty obvious why they're doing that. They don't want servicers denying loss mitigation options based on incomplete applications, but they do want them to be able to offer just a kind of a short-term fix, and would still have to consider borrowers for other loss mitigation options, but would be allowed to offer that just a short-term repayment.
So that would be the equivalent of the modification payment, or do we know what that means? That short-term?
I don't think it's. I mean, it would not be a permanent modification. It would just be a short-term, and I didn't see what time period that means. I'm sure there's a limit on it, but I imagine it's in the 3 to 6 month range. Just short-term, get you caught up with, so does that answer your question?
Well, I guess the question is how much would it be, as well as how long will it be. And so if it mirrors the affordable payment that would happen if you got a modification, then great, that's excellent, but it would be nice to know.
Right. I'm guessing, and this should all be, we'll say with a grain of salt, because I'm guessing and haven't looked at the rule and can report back with better information when we have it. But I'm guessing that it's for the scenario where it's a short-term job loss and the person is a month or 2 months behind, but now is working again. and their income is back, and will give them the option of getting caught up outside of having to go through a complete loss mitigation application. I imagine that's the scenario that they're contemplating here, or something comparable to that. All right. I think the last thing. Oh no, a couple more things to touch on.
Yeah.
So it would require where there's a transfer of the mortgage. If it's a voluntary transfer, it would require the new servicer to keep the same deadlines that the original servicer had. So meaning that if the original servicer had a complete loss mitigation application, so that triggers the requirement that they need to make a decision on it within 30 days. If that loan gets transferred, regardless of where they are on the clock, that clock would apply to the new servicer as well.
So if they have 15 days already eaten up of the 30 days, the new servicer has to decide within the remaining 15 days.
Exactly. It would,
wow,
but that's in the case of a voluntary transfer. If it's an involuntary transfer, the new servicer would be guaranteed having 15 days. So if there's only 10 days left on the clock, if it's an involuntary transfer, they would get those 5 extra days. So they would have 15 days to make a decision. But yeah, it's good. And the last thing to touch on, and then we'll see if there's any questions. So it would expand the they do a lot with successors in interest. One thing, and it's good. They
successors in interest, just so everybody's clear, is the widows and orphans issue. So
exactly,
mortgage holder dies, and what happens if people are living in the house or family members or that sort of thing.
Yeah, and they have a lot of good things to say, kind of recognizing what the issues have been. In the regs, in the proposed rule, they're very clear that they've kind of heard from consumer advocates, folks like our folks on this call who've been very clear with them that this was an issue they needed to address. So it's encouraging, and with a lot of this, it's encouraging that they're showing a willingness to kind of revisit, see what's working, and make tweaks where things need to be tweaked. I will say that there's more that we would like them to do, and we'll be asking them to do, but can kind of get back to that in a minute. But so they would the new proposal rules would expand the definition of who is a successor in interest. So right now it's pretty limited. It's limited to someone who inherits property that's subject to a mortgage. So it's in the case of the death of the property owner is the extent of who's considered a successor in interest now. Under the proposal, it would be anyone with a legal interest when the property is transferred after a divorce or legal separation, between spouses, from a parent to a child, when a joint tenant dies, or through a family trust. So it would expand the universe of who's considered a successor in interest, and it would also, so it would apply the protections of the rules to successors in interests. It would require the servicer to, if someone reaches out to the servicer and says, I believe I am a successor in interest, the servicer would require to respond to that with really clear description of what they need to provide, what documentation or evidence they need to provide in order to establish themselves as a successor in interest, and it would apply the rules once someone is confirmed as a successor in interest. So I think that's all I'm going to say for now. Again, there's quite a lot in the 500 pages, and can give a more detailed either account on a future call, or maybe we'll do a written description of what's there. I do see there's some questions that I'll just.
I can read one to you.
Okay.
So Gail Fernandez has asked, what about dual tracking while a servicer is waiting for information from a third party?
So, and again, just this is not based on the full reading of everything. There are some things on dual tracking in there, but as far as the third party, while they're waiting for the third party information, they certainly can't initiate the foreclosure and they can't deny the application. Based on my reading of what's in there, I think that means it's basically a hold on any adverse action while they're waiting, once they have the complete application. I mean, there's some question if, dual tracking under the rules is still permitted if it's fewer than 37 days, if the complete application is received fewer than 37 days before a scheduled foreclosure sale. So I can't say exactly how it would apply in that scenario, but I do think in most scenarios where the application is received at least 37 days, and I forget if it's 37 or more, or at least 37, before a scheduled sale, that I think it would halt everything.
So Dana Snell asks, what is a voluntary versus an involuntary transfer in servicing?
And you may have a better answer for this than I do, but I took it to mean, in some cases, I guess if a servicer closes its doors, a portfolio might be, regulators may transfer, kind of force a transfer, or there might be other scenarios where a regulator would force a servicer to transfer some or all of its portfolio. I'm not sure if that's how I read it, but I did not get into a specific definition of each.
Yeah, actually, I don't know that answer either. So we'll figure it out. Could be a voluntary sale rather than having a regulator come in and require a transfer, but I don't know. Let's see. So let's take. Here's another one. You addressed the timeline of response by the lender with regards to receipt of a complete packet, but did not address what if the lender had already begun the foreclosure process.
So if the process has begun, let's see, the question is, so if the process has begun, the way that the rule is written, even if the foreclosure process has started, if a borrower submits a complete application, that puts it on hold in most cases. Basically, that's the dual tracking provisions. If it's not exactly that, because of that, what I mentioned before, that if it's less than 37 days before, then there's still some protections, but it doesn't absolutely require the servicer to halt all foreclosure. And they have to halt it until they've considered the borrower's application and made a decision. If the borrower does not submit a complete application, then there isn't a halt on the foreclosure process, although if they submit an initial application, or if they get the process going, the servicer is required to take steps to try to get the application completed. But if this borrower does not submit a complete application, that it's not the halt on the foreclosure process is not going to be triggered. I hope that addresses that question. Do you think that does, Bruce?
Well, we're going to learn a lot more about these as you plow through the 500 pages. I just saw one question from Ellie Pepper asking about, has there been any progress on getting the 1308, the post-modification counseling, made available to more counseling agencies? And we've continued to push this, and one of the angles, it doesn't look like Treasury is going to be able to do much more than what they've done already. One of the angles that we've been talking to servicers, and there seems to be some interest at Wells and some at Ocwen about working with some of the existing relationships they already have, where they're already contracting with agencies, but trying to capture those cases. The scuttlebutt that I hear is that there's very low volume on this and a very low take-up, and it does seem like if we could get counseling agencies to be able to identify people that they'd already worked with who would be interested in it, and then have them, the phrase that Treasury uses is raise your hand, that would be a good opportunity. So I'm not aware that Wells is doing it, and I'm pretty sure it's under consideration there. Certainly feel free to talk to any servicer about, trying to get a pilot going or something like that, because we do need to get some traction on this. I know Ocwen's not doing it yet, but it's under consideration with them. So, one of those 2015 projects we got to pay attention to. I do think that this particular slice of the business of really working with people on their finances is a very important part of our future, and I think the outside world kind of understands why it's important, and we have to figure out how to make it both work in terms of us getting those kind of cases and to getting paid for them.
And if we could just spend another minute or two on this, a couple more points to make. Well, first, there's another follow-up question on the 37 days. So let me just try to explain that. And the 37 days is, and I forget again if it's exactly at least 37 days or if it's 37 or more days, but more or less 30. If the dual tracking provisions work in the regs now, that as long as the borrower submits a complete application and the servicer has received a complete application at least, say, 37 days before a scheduled foreclosure sale, then the foreclosure process gets halted until the servicer has considered the application. And there's still some protections if they receive it fewer than 37 days before, but there's not an absolute prohibition on dual tracking, because if it's fewer than 37 days, then the borrower doesn't have the total. It's not a total stop from that happening. So that's why the 37 days is the time before a scheduled foreclosure sale for the borrower to have submitted and the servicer to receive a complete application. Really, the rules, and this is, so another point is that we're going to be releasing soon a report that we did based on the survey that you all did on the current regulations, and we're going to make recommendations. So these rules are the proposed changes. There's good things in there, probably also some bad things in there, but there are also bigger picture things that we think they need to change. I think most importantly is that we think that the standard shouldn't be a complete application, and that's really the key right now. And the rules as they're currently written, the borrowers, the protections are really triggered by the borrower submitting a complete application. We've pushed for before and will continue to push that it really should be triggered by an initial application, which would be, we've said should be defined as basically a HAMP application. And so I think that's important to keep in mind, that these are by and large, these are positive, but they're not huge things, and there's probably room for more improvement. I think I should stop there for now.
Good. Actually, this reminds me also, one of the things that's in the survey that's not in the servicing standards is all the issues around language access, and that did come up in the White House meeting a couple times, and I think it's an area that we need to continue pushing on. But it's an area that you can tell this was definitely something that's had not been moving, despite how important it is to a large segment of the people that we work with and the housing consumer population in general. This is clearly now getting a lot more attention, and hopefully we can build this into the process more, that there'll be much more non-English speaking friendly materials, that there'll be better tracking and reporting, so that servicers will know who speaks what language, and we'll build this in from step one in the mortgage application process. So that's definitely one of the 2015 projects that we've queued up with FHFA, and keep it in mind. Good. Okay, well, why don't we move on to, let's see, so we've got So one of the big issues that we work a lot on, or we hear a lot about, people are concerned a lot about, are compliance issues and knowing about how to handle HUD reporting and documentation. So we've developed this members-only, it's a webinar series really aimed at having smaller groups to be able to really focus in on these issues. And we've recruited Teresa Bardwell from RCAC, who's done some of these and become quite a specialist in them. And we've got a whole series that we're working through that will be help agencies, and you can certainly, whoever you feel like, if you're a member of NHRC, whoever in your staff you want to participate, we'd love to have you join us for these, and we'll get the registration, all that stuff through the membership list. But want to let people know that this is one more resource we're making available to members. Is there more you want to say about it, Matthew?
No, we're very excited. Teresa Bardwell from RCAC is going to be leading these, and she's great for folks that have had trainings with her before. So yeah, we're very excited.
Good, yeah. So HUD 9902, the HUD 9910, which is the interview for site reviews, the agency work plan, the quality control plan, becoming more important for agencies, and then information security. And there'll be more that we will do through the course of the year, but this is a pretty healthy start, and we're going to learn from it and expand the list as we go, depending on what people are interested in. So that sounds good. So one thing, I shot an email around about this recent CFPB rulemaking or decision on disability income. I think some of you see this in your field work in trying to help people buy houses, where the lender requires that if you have disability income, that you have to get a documentation from the government saying that it'll be available for 3 years into the future, and no agency gives you more than 1 year, so this has been a real problem. And what happened was, interestingly enough, it was a complaint that was filed with HUD, so under, I assume, Fair Housing, but I'm not sure, but that's what I assume it is. And it was against American Bank, which is based in Maryland. And but this group, this couple was from South Dakota, and they were required to document at least 3 years when they refinanced the mortgage. For some reason, the bank also reached out to the doctor and wanted to have documentation that the disability would be long-term, which sounds pretty intrusive. They filed a complaint, and the CFPB stepped in and provided a fine for the bank and said that there couldn't be a standard, you couldn't apply a standard that was different for people with a disability from what other borrowers would get. And having seen this in the field a bunch, this is a really valuable tool. I thought, I just wanted to highlight it for people as something important to keep your eye out for. And where you see it, to file a complaint with HUD, and I would do it with the CFPB as well. But this is an area where an important element of what makes people, what disadvantages people who have disabilities. This is an area where this could be very meaningful and helpful. So we just pushed out an article from the Washington Post about it, so you can read more about it there, but just wanted to make sure it was on everybody's list. And then finally, just want to encourage people to join NHRC. Put us in your budget for 2015. Certainly if you're members, really want you to come to the morning session of the leaders meeting and lunch. We continue to offer more benefits for members, but I mean, really the reason that people join, I think, is that it's supporting the work of really trying to elevate housing counseling and make us a much more strategic player in government circles and in programs, so that your work is more effective in the field. So, and please feel free to keep telling us about issues you're seeing in the field and things you'd like to know more about. This is really how we shape our programs, and we appreciate it. So our next call will be in December, December 4th, and good news there is that we'll be doing some prep for the meeting in the following week in D.C. So again, a quick reminder, if you're planning on coming, please register. This really helps us with planning a lot. So things are filling up some, but we have room for you. So please make a special effort to follow up the link and make sure that if you're a member to use the special members link and just ask me for it, or Matthew, and we'll get it to you if you don't have it. All right. Well, have a great Thanksgiving, folks. You certainly earned it, and we'll be back and see you in December. Thanks. Bye.